not kidding about that energy thing. As I said last time, my goal is to write the end of this series before Sanderson gets his hands on it. So I'm going to read you, as usual, from the next book, which will come out in the spring of next year. I'm not touring with this book, as a matter of fact, but I'll probably come here. Does that count? I don't know. I usually always come to Powell's and University Bookstore in Seattle, so I'm probably going to do the same thing again next year. But I'm not going to hit the road again, because this year's hitting the road, it reminded me how much it takes out of you, and I don't think I've got it in me anymore. I'm going to read to you from the next book, as I said, but I'm reading to you from something I haven't done before. I just decided I'd had enough of the thing I've been reading, so I decided to pick something else out. Chose a different section of the book to read, which hopefully will be entertaining and satisfy my requirement for reading something from a new book. I'll be publishing next year in March and in sometime in the late summer, probably August, 2 of 3, and then the third one sometime in 2015, I guess it is. So that's my current plan as far as publishing goes. So anyway, have I read from this book before? HIGH DRUID'S BLADE? Anybody even know what it is? Okay, let's try it. Let's talk about it just a minute. HIGH DRUID'S BLADE is the first of a series of 3 standalones that I'm doing. That's my next commitment. I'm responding to your repeated request to stop writing trilogies by doing these standalone books. So here's 3 anyway. I'm not promising anything after that. Each of these books will feature characters that will carry over from one book to the other. Not all of them will, but some of them will. The central character is the antagonist, not the protagonist, so that's something a little bit different. I got to keep switching things around so I don't, fall into some kind of rut. So anyway, I'm going to read to you tonight. The story is really about this particular book, HIGH DRUID'S BLADE. It's a position that's been established in the Druid Order, and the HIGH DRUID'S BLADE is actually a person who is selected to be the personal protector of the Druids, who are sent out to do quests, sort of like the Knights of the Round Table used to do. They're not necessarily all trained in the art of warcraft or with weapons. So they take along the HIGH DRUID'S BLADE as protection against whatever might be out there. Some of them need it more than others, as it turns out. In this particular case, the main character in the book is a young man named Paxton Lee, and Paxton Lee has been selected to train to be the HIGH DRUID'S BLADE. He has been selected because, number one, he has the Sword of Leah, which we may remember from earlier books is in fact a magical artifact, and has a great deal of power. Although nobody's figured this out until just recently, but Paxton has, and so as a result of an unhappy happenstance for him, he's been dragooned into being the HIGH DRUID'S BLADE. In this particular section I'm going to read to you from, he has gone forth into the Wilderrun in the Westland with a druid named Starks. And his job is to find out why there's a magic there. There's some kind of a rogue magic that neither one of them know exactly what it is, but they're trying to make a determination, and they have tracked it to this tavern. Doesn't it always work that way? So they're about to enter this tavern, and as a result, this is what happens. Inside, it was a madhouse. Men and women were crowded up against one another, shoulder to shoulder, with barely space to move about. The room was cavernous and so dark and smoky that Paxton could not see into the murky corners and higher spaces at all. Patrons stood 3 deep at the serving bar, and all the tables were filled. The laughter and shouting were deafening. Starks took a quick look around and then began maneuvering his way toward the end of the counter where the serving girls were gathering tankards of ale on trays to carry to the tables. Paxton followed, trying to stay close. It required considerable effort, but they eventually reached their destination. Starks immediately bent to the closest server and whispered in her ear. She went white, nodded slowly, and did not turn to look at him. Instead, she mouthed something Paxton couldn't hear, picked up her tray, and swiftly went about her business. Starks moved deeper into the room, Paxson following in his wake, using him as a buffer against the crowds. Although he was repeatedly jostled, he kept his feet and stayed close, scanning the crowds, taking in everything, thinking he might see something that mattered. And then he did. At the very back of the room, a tall figure, cloaked and hooded, rose from a table and went out through the back door. Two others sitting with him, thicker of build and heavily muscled, moved in front of the door and stood blocking it. "Starks," Paxson hissed, tapping him hurriedly on the shoulder. The druid glanced back at him, following his gaze, and nodded. "How many others?" "Only one that I saw. He went out through the door just ahead of those two. I can't be certain, but it looked like..." He let the rest hang, so uncertain his eyes had not deceived him, he didn't want to finish the thought. Starks was already moving anyway, making for the door and the men guarding it, no longer evidencing even a trace of the careless disinterest that had marked his earlier behavior. Paxson started to reach for his sword, but the patrons of the tavern were packed together so tightly that he couldn't find space to maneuver. Starks wasn't waiting anyway. He came up to the men without slowing, felled one with a fist that shimmered with blue fire as it connected, and stunned the second with a bolt of the same fire flung from his hand in a brilliant flash. Both men went down, and Starks was past them and out the door to the yard beyond the tavern, Paxson at his heels. But in the next instant, a shock wave of black light exploded into them, throwing them back against the rear wall of the tavern. Starks was leading, so he took the brunt of the strike and lay motionless on the ground. But Paxson was only momentarily stunned, and he came back to his feet swiftly, drawing the sword of Leah as he did. Another flash of fire exploded toward him, but this time Paxson caught it on the edge of his black blade and shattered it into harmless fragments. In the dying light, he saw the attack had come from a stable set out behind the tavern at the end of the lot, a smallish structure with a handful of stalls and a maintenance shed. He also caught a glimpse of two figures crouched within the shed's entrance. Then everything went dark again, and Paxson was forced to wait until his vision adjusted. Crouched in the night's gloom, aware of Starks unmoving behind him and the figures ahead waiting, he held his ground, ready for a fresh attack. When he could see again, the entrance to the stable was empty, and the figures were gone. He advanced warily, thinking it might be a trap, but when he reached the building, he could tell it was deserted. There weren't even any horses in the stalls. He was about to go back to see Starks when he noticed the dark bundle in a corner at the rear of the structure. Casting a quick look around, he went for a closer look and found a boy of perhaps 18, his hands and feet bound and his body badly mutilated. It looked as if he had been cut and burned repeatedly. His eyes were wide and staring, and his mouth was stretched as if trying to scream. He must have died in the midst of whatever torture he was enduring. Paxson found and lit a lamp and bent close to the boy. Blood stained the ground around his body, and he could make out the strange markings of boot prints. "Federation issue," Starks said, bending close. He was back on his feet, but one side of his face and body were heavily singed. But these were people who knew magic, not common soldiers. That boy was subjected to a lot of pain, both internal and external. They wanted something from him, and I would be surprised if they didn't get it. The magic we were hunting, that for certain. But I think they wanted something else. Something that wasn't so tangible, perhaps an explanation for how he found the magic, or how he learned to use it, or where he heard of it. He looked at Paxson. "How many of them did you see?" "Two. The one that left the tavern ahead of us, and a second who must have already been out here waiting. What's going on? Did both forms of the magic you sensed earlier belong to these two men, or did one belong to whatever talisman the boy was hiding?" "I'm not certain. At least one form of magic was what killed this boy, we know that much. To know anything more, we would have to find the men who did this, if they were men." Paxson stared at him. If they were men, what else could they be? Were they dealing with some other form of creature? "Let's go after them," he said abruptly. "Maybe we can still catch them." Starks gave him a look. Maybe they would like that. Then he shrugged. "Let's do it anyway." They set out at once. Starks seemed to know where he was going. His head lifted, his eyes peering through the darkness as if he could see beyond it. They went at a fast trot, heading farther outside the town in the opposite direction from which they had come, following a narrow pathway into the trees. The shouts and laughter of Grimpen Ward slowly faded away, and the night's stillness grew deep and pervasive. The only sounds now were of their own breathing and footfalls as they ran. Paxson had his sword out, ready for use, fully expecting that he would need it. Starks didn't object. Once or twice, as they were running, Paxson caught sight of familiar boot prints in the soft earth ahead, and he knew they were on the right track. Ahead, the woods opened into a broad, treeless stretch of pasture, and an airship sat bathed in moonlight on its far side. 2 figures were running toward him and had nearly reached him. "Leo!" roared Paxson, caught up in the moment, and with a sudden burst of speed, he raced right past Starks in an effort to catch the fleeing men. He should have used better judgment. Ordinary men would have offered no threat to him from this distance, but magic users were another story. They turned, and the entire pasture lit up with explosions of green fire. It had the look and feel of an attack by flash rips and fire launchers, and Paxson was suddenly dodging this way and that to avoid being struck. He heard Starks calling out to him from behind, but he was too busy trying to stay alive to respond. One of the men abandoned the attack and scrambled aboard the 2-man, powering up the diapson crystals and preparing to lift off. Paxson ran harder, close enough now that he thought he could launch his own attack. But in the next instant, he was struck a powerful blow that lifted him off his feet and threw him backward. His clothing was on fire, and his ears were ringing. He collapsed, still clinging to his sword, fighting to stay conscious. An instant later, Starks was bending over him, smothering the fire with a sort of dry mist.
Dry mist.
Dry mist. I haven't gotten over this yet. But we'll see. Paxson gasped for breath and tried to sit up, hearing the sound of the airship ascending into the night sky. "Stay where you are," Starks ordered, pushing him down again. "It's too late now. They've gone. What were you thinking anyway?" I just thought they might panic, and then I could catch them," he gasped. "Stupid, I know." The druid felt carefully along his arms and legs and torso. "No harm done, apparently. But don't ever do that again, or it will be your last outing with the druids. Am I understood?" Paxson nodded. "Can I get up now?" Starks pulled him to his feet. "At least we know a few things we didn't know before." "We do?" The druid grinned. "Well, for one, we know you can't readily disengage your brain from your impulses. You'll have to work on that. I'll tell you the rest on our flight back to Paranor. Come along. Put that sword away, please." Feeling both exhilarated and sheepish, Paxson Lee did as he was told. Okay, so that's an introduction to the next book, and Paxson Lee, who is the main character in that story. There's a different main character in the following book, and I haven't written the third one, so I don't know what's going on in that one. Of course, I'm sure it will be brilliant, so you won't have to worry. I've told you before, I think, I'm getting a little bit confused here as time goes on with what I've told people and what I haven't told them. Particularly with doing this 2 books a year thing, which comes to an end, by the way, next year. But I believe I said I'm going to end the Shannara series. I did say that, didn't I? Right. I'm still going to end it. Still planning to write the ending fairly soon. And then if I choose to write other books, it'll be, filling in gaps and completing obligations I've set myself or that I maybe promised I would do, although don't count on that because my word is worthless. I'm going to write some different books. I'll be working on that. The next thing that will be coming out that you might be interested in is the Cemetery Press edition of Running with the Demon. That'll be out next, I think it's next March. Is that right? Next March. So don't fail to look for that because it's going to be a pretty nice edition with illustrations, very nice artwork, kind of a high-end sort of book. Still like that book. I'm still mad about the fact that it didn't do better than it should have. It's better than it did. So we also have copies of Unfettered here. Please hold that up. Thank you. Copies of Unfettered. This is Sean Speakman's effort to produce a compilation of some of the best authors in the business today in in a short collection of short stories, although some of them aren't so short. It's a terrific, it's probably a one-of-a-kind thing. I don't think anybody will ever get people like this together again in one group, especially since some of them are dead. If you have your book with you tonight and you want my signature and Sean's signature, you can at least get 2 of those signatures tonight with no trouble because we're both here.
And you're not dead.
And I'm not yet dead. Not dead yet. Spam a lot. So, other than that, what can I tell you? I can tell you, oh yeah, I can tell you about the movie, I can tell you about the TV series. So, the TV series is, I don't know how much we've talked about this. This is another thing I've talked about till I'm blue in the face. And every time I think I'm going to be able to make a pronouncement of some meaningful value, no, that doesn't happen because the promises that are made from the lower part of California in the La La Land don't always come to pass. Who knew? So here's what I'm told, and what I believe to be true. We have writers, we have a director. They're both significantly well known. That the belief of those who are in the know and will take all this to the networks at the end of August is that somebody will pick this up right away. So we'll see. This is what I'm promising. I'm also told there will be an announcement next week. I think I said this last time I was here. There was no announcement. So who knows? But supposedly there will be something next week on the names of the director and the writers. And later this month, as I say, we hope to have it placed, and I can stop talking about it. All I really want to do is write, all I really want to do is sell books, right? I mean, that's it. Oh, I collect royalty checks. I want to do that too. But as far as the rest of this stuff, I don't know. So the other thing I can tell you is that Magic Kingdom for Sale is still alive and well and in the hands of good people. They have a new writer, a fellow named Patrick Ness. Patrick Ness is actually somebody you might know. I see a few nodded heads out there. He has written both books and done screenplays. He writes fantasy. Who knew? What a brilliant concept. Why don't we get a fantasy writer to do a fantasy screenplay for a fantasy book? At any rate, it only took him 3 years to come to this conclusion. So with luck, and I have been in communication with Patrick, who's a really good guy, and I like him a lot, and he's at least saying all the right things to me about what he intends to see happen. And he's going to do the best job he can, and we're going to talk about it as it goes along. So basically, I think we have reason to hope that this will proceed in the way we would like it to. Look him up on the internet. You can see what he's doing. And that's all I have to say, I think. Does anybody have a question they would like to ask about anything at all? Oh, you're spoiling it, man. Don't do it. Okay, go ahead.
Actually, the question isn't directly about your work. In one of your books, you mentioned your wife got advice about dealing with you being away, because you're always thinking and imagining. Give me words of advice from my wife, because she's stuck with me doing the same thing all the time. What?
How cheeky would this be if I were to advise your wife of anything? I want you to know that in my house, I don't advise my own wife alone. I don't know. I think that there's definitely a line you have to walk when you're doing this kind of work, where you have one foot on one side of the line, which is your writing life, and you have one foot on the other side of the line, which is your personal life, which involves the family and what have you. And that's not always easy to maintain. And you sometimes forget about the one versus the other, and I have to be reminded fairly regularly that it's time to stop, living in my office and to come on out and be part of the family again. It's getting somewhat easier than it used to be, I'll admit, but your tendency is to go too far in the direction of working there. I mean, my wife travels with me now. That helped tremendously. It took a little while to get that one worked out, but really it's much better. And because she's in the book business too, obviously she's a huge asset to me and keeps me keeps things moving in a smooth direction. For me, I need a lot of looking after. I know you can't tell this, but it's true. So the more she's around to help keep me on the straight and narrow, the better it is all the way along. And I function much better in that situation. So that is my best piece of advice about trying to find a middle ground. Kind of important. Anybody else? I scared them all. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Have you considered putting a glossary in your book so that we pronounce words in the way that you intended them to be pronounced? Since I pronounced Shannara wrong for so many years.
Yes, along with everybody else. It's perfectly okay. I considered doing that way back in the day after Sword. I thought, you know, well, maybe I should put a glossary in here. There should be, and then over the years people have said, why don't you do this? Well, you know, I'm pretty lazy. So I decided, no, I'm not going to do this. But more to the point, I really don't feel that that's a good way to function. I don't like glossaries. I don't like people telling me how to think and what to do. And I sort of like the idea that when the book leaves my hands and gets into your hands, it's your book. And you should feel free to pronounce the names the way you want to. It really doesn't matter how I pronounce them, you know. It's not like I'm standing up there saying, if you do not pronounce this name right, I'll never sell you another book. That's not going to happen. You can pronounce them any way you want to. And really, part of the thing that's enjoyable about reading is that it's such a personal experience for every reader. And therefore, the ability to make those names your own and those characters your own is in part made possible by the fact that you can choose to pronounce the names the way you want to. So I try to steer clear of that sort of thing, and that also gets me off the hook for having to do additional work. Works out pretty good, I think. Yes, way in the back.
That would be me.
Hi, young lady.
Running with the Demon is my favorite book, too. And could you repeat the question, please? We can't hear.
Oh, certainly that's poor of me, I must say. Which question would you like repeated?
All of them.
All of them? Did I mention that my wife is here tonight? Not only is my wife here tonight, but my sister is here tonight. Not only is my sister here tonight, but my niece is here tonight. Not only are they here, but of course Sean is here, and my friend Kuyu from the old Ballantine book days, who's now at Diamond Comics, is here. We all had dinner beforehand and told lies and stories and a lot of fun stuff. But they're pretty good about that. Well, the first person asked me about balancing my professional and personal life. So that was the first question. And the second question was, and you're right, I should repeat these, and that's very poor of me not to remember to do this. Second question had to do with a glossary at the back of the book, explaining how you pronounce the names. And you heard what I had to say about that, so that is where I am at. And thank you, Sister Lori. Yes, ma'am.
I heard that you were going to write another book in the Magic Kingdom series. Is that still true?
Am I going to write another book in the Magic Kingdom series? I don't have a new book for the Magic Kingdom series on the schedule at this point. But as I've said many times, the minute they make that movie, that book will be out there so fast. You will not believe. Because I hate to let an opportunity like that pass me by. I don't know. I finished Princess of Landover and published it in 9 or 10, I forget which. And obviously, there's an opening at the end of that book for a follow-up. And there is, in fact, a kind of a half-formed plan for that follow-up in my head. But I don't have that on the schedule because I'm working on these 3 other books right now, and then I'm going to write something entirely different, not unconnected to anything I've done before. And I've been thinking about it for 5 years, and it's about to drive me right up the wall. And I have got to get it written before it leaches away in some fashion or other. So that's kind of where we're at, I think, at the moment with plans with Magic Kingdom. Yes, sir.
Talk about ending the Shannara series. Do you know how many more books you have planned or you're aiming for?
How many books do I have planned in order to get to and maybe perhaps end the series? Well, you know, how long do I have to live? Assuming I can get another decade or so out of this thing, I might just shove it along for a while. But really, I kind of would like to do it fairly soon. I'd like to do it in the next 5 years. But that doesn't limit the number of books I might continue to do in the series itself. I just kind of want to write the end. Then I can say I wrote it front to back, and nobody can ever say differently, because if I don't write these other books, someone else will, as we all know. A trunk full of unfinished manuscripts will surface shortly after my demise. Yes, sir. Either one.
So after you pass, is it going to be Sean? Is that right?
God forbid.
Is Sean going to write the end of the series? No, you know what? That's not going to happen, because by then, I'm expecting Sean will be too big to have anything to do with me. Since he continues to work like a, fevered little rabbit on his books, and has projects going on all the time, I'm waiting for the hammer to fall when he says, I'd like to continue with you, but I've moved beyond you now. And have to go. No, I don't know. I'd be happy if Sean did it. I'm sure that the publisher will make that determination, and perhaps Jadine will have something to say about it as well. We'll see. I have kids that need employed. Maybe they'll do it. I don't know. Yes, sir.
How much creative control are you going to have on the movies and that stuff?
Oh.
See what they did to Terry Goodkind.
That comes, how much control am I going to have over the TV series and the movies, because look what happened to Terry Goodkind. That comes up all the time. I've never seen that. It must have been awful.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, people say, it's not going to be like that, is it? I think, well, I guess not. Well, I don't know. That's a very good point. This is apples and oranges. I don't have creative control over Magic Kingdom, because it's an option to a studio, and so the studio and Steve Carell and Steve Carell's people and Weed Road, the production company, they're the ones that have the creative control. Do they listen to me? Yes. Do they always pay attention? No. So my guess is that we will get from talking to people at this stage of the game, my feeling is that we'll get a pretty good representation of Magic Kingdom, but I don't think it'll be exactly like the book. That is my best guess. Shannara, on the other hand, is a different story, because I do have creative control over that project. It's a partnership. I am a partner. I have creative control. I have actually got yes, no control over almost everything. So at this point, I know from talking with the writers personally that they don't plan to step outside the lines at all on Elfstones. And that the feeling is that we may have to cut some things, but we won't be changing the basic storyline or the characters or anything of that sort, with which I'm pretty happy. They're already figuring out, well, how do we do all this interior monologue and prehistory and all that kind of stuff? And you have to do it differently than you would in a book. You can't just have a long recitation, and you can't have interior monologue and so forth. So all of that will there'll be some changes, because it's a movie. It's got to change. But they changed Lord of the Rings when they did the movie, and how many of us are unhappy about the way that turned out? I thought it was pretty great. So if I get that, I'll be real happy about that. I promise to settle for nothing less. All right. How about the gentleman back there? Did your question get answered for it?
Not quite yet. It falls within the ending to Shannara as you were talking about it, and obviously it's coming soon. Have you had it in your head for a while, or you haven't thought about it yet? Do you know how you're going to end it?
The question is, do I know how I'm going to end the Shannara series, and have I had it in my head for a while? And when I hear those questions, I'm really tempted to say, I have always known. It's all been up there since the beginning. But the fact is, there's almost nothing in my head. And in this particular instance, I have a I have a sense of thematically how I want it to end, but of the specifics, no. I'll figure them out when I get to the point where I'm ready to sit down and do it, and figure how many books I want to spend on it, etc. So I'm not there yet. No. Your suggestions are welcome. What other question? Yes.
Kind of piggyback on what they were asking about the movie. A lot of writers or directors will do a cameo. Do you foresee that? And if you did, what would your character be? You know, it's kind of it's really fun to watch a movie and then you see it's like an Easter egg, you know, they're hidden in there.
Well, what kind of a cameo would I personally do, or you?
Well, you know, if it hasn't been made yet, there's still time to negotiate.
Colleen.
Well, I would say I'm hoping for a sex scene, but the fact of the matter is that we're doing this as family fare, so there won't be any of that. So maybe I'll just, you know, be content with staying in the background and monitoring things and leave it at that. I don't really. It's like when people say, "Well, who do you think ought to be Al-Anon, for example?" And you know, well, I've had some thoughts about that over the years, and but those people are dead now. So I'm leaning in another direction these days, but I don't want to talk about it just yet because I kind of have my wish list of what might happen and not. I don't think I should be in it. No, you know, I don't have any acting talent.
Well, you know, like
stand-up comedian, right?
Twilight. Stephanie Meyer was actually in Twilight at the counter typing her 4th book, and Stanley's always in those movies.
Ah, yeah, Stephanie. Yeah, well, I don't know. Stephanie may be in her own movies, and I guess lots of other writers make a cameo. I know Debbie McComber's in hers, in her TV series and so forth, or whatever, movie of the week. So I don't know. Stephanie just said she's so over Twilight. I'm so over Twilight, she said. Anyway, I'm not over Shannara yet. So I don't know. I just don't think about that kind of stuff. I really don't. It takes everything I've got just to think about the books and what they need to be, and I'm sort of wedded to that way of life. I'm struggling right now with the e-books thing, so you know, we'll see. Yes, sir.
After you finish the Shannara series and you do like little books in between, have you ever thought of doing one about the King of the Silver River?
Have you ever thought writing a book about the King of the Silver River? Not seriously. I mean, lots of people ask me about doing lots of characters in the book, right? And so far, all I've been able to make myself do is write 3 short stories. And say, well, here it is. This is it. This is Garrett Jacks, this is Al-Anon, and this is Panama Creole. About doing a whole other book, that's a big undertaking, and it would need to fill a gap somewhere where I felt it was important. I don't know. I just right now, no. I'm not thinking about doing any particular character. You know, every so often I think maybe I should do something more with Word and Void, but so far I haven't been able to persuade myself of that either. So I guess I'm just sort of waiting around to see what happens at this point. You know, if the Shannara series does very well as a TV series, that might determine what I do. If Magic Kingdom does very well, that might determine. If I get fed up to the teeth with everything, then maybe I'll do something different entirely. Really, I think right now, you know, honestly, the thing that I'm most driven by is a need to write something else. I just have to write something else. It's driving me crazy, and I have to get through my obligations and all these other projects and sit down and write some different things because it's time. It is time. Yes, ma'am.
I remember years ago there was a computer game that came out, and my husband decided it was way too violent for our son. I had bought it for myself, and he destroyed it. Have you been solicited to direct any computer game based on your series?
Yeah, talking about computer games like the old sort of Shannara computer game, and the answer to this is that all those rights are tied up by Sonar Entertainment in the TV series.
Okay.
If the TV series gets made, and particularly if it's successful, you will not be able to walk down the street without somebody coming out of the alleyway with action figures in their coat. Right? I mean, can you go anywhere in this country where you can't find something with Game of Thrones? You can't, right? You know that's how it goes. And if it's driven in that fashion, then that will determine what happens. If in fact it tanks or doesn't get made, then of course it's up for grabs all over again, and we'd have to see. But at this point, I'm not even thinking about it because there's no point. I mean, it's all under the control of what happens with the series. Okay, a couple more and we'll quit, okay? Anybody else? Yeah, good, we're done. That was easy. So anyway, thank you very much for coming. I will see you next spring, and we will talk about that book, maybe, the new book, HIGH DRUID'S BLADE. If you have your unfettered copies or whatever, we'll get those signed for you tonight along with anything else. Remember, those of you with the shopping carts and whatever else, will you please wait till the end and let the common people through first so we can get those 1, 2, 3, and 4 books signed and get it taken care of there. And again, I will remind you what I remind you of every single time. Judine always says, I have the best fans in the world. Those are you. Thank you very much.